Hello there beautiful, welcome back to my channel. My name is Joesephyr and welcome to another shoot you pull video for Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia. Now in today's video we're going to be covering somebody that a lot of players have been looking forward to for quite some time, as well as a new boss rush chapter and one that's going to take a lot of use out of this new character, which is going to be Auron. Now Auron hasn't categorically been the best character in the world for the longest time, but trust me when I say that a lot of that changes when it comes to his LD. He doesn't actually get a rework, but he don't really need one. So if you'd like to find out why that might be the case, all the details about Auron and what he brings to the table with his new LD, and of course more about Boss Rush 6, then of course stay tuned and keep on watching. Before we get started, of course, don't forget to check out all of my social media links down in the description box below, including Twitter, Twitch, Discord, and Patreon. Over on Twitch, you can find me streaming most Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia events, Final Fantasy XIV, and of course Final Fantasy V Pixel Remaster, and all sorts of other Final Fantasy rated goods. However, when it comes to this particular event, I am actually taking a week off from streaming during the time that this video will have been released, so I will not be covering Auron and the Boss Rush chapter over on Twitch, but I may well consider doing a recorded run over on YouTube at some point. But please don't be mad at me if perhaps I miss one event. I've never really missed any up until this point, but I'm gonna try and take a bit of time for myself so that I can figure out some ways that I'd like to kind of take the channel in a new direction prior to Endwalker's release and stuff like that. So I may not be uploading anything to do with covering the actual Boss Rush event, but there's lots of other content creators out there that will, so don't worry, you won't be starved for content on that front. Over on Patreon, I do always shout out one of my patrons every time I release a brand new video, and today that person is going to be Xenofantasy, who is somebody that actually helped me enable to be able to take that week off. So a massive thank you goes out to you. And they have Shulk from Xenoblade Chronicles on their title card, and I really love making these title cards. And one of the things I'm looking at doing in my week off is figuring out a nice extra special way that I can do some really cool things with the title cards over on Patreon, so you'll have that to look forward to when I return. And then of course don't forget to check out all of the other content creators and resources out there for Dissidia Opera Omnia, with particular mentions of course to Tonbury Troop for their fantastic infographics, Leo Bob for their translations over on Reddit, Dissidia Compendium and DissidiaDB.com for their fantastic generalized resources, as they're all things that I use on this channel. They're all linked to the description box below, and I encourage you guys to check them out as well as me. Okay, so let's start by taking a look at what the banner is, and therefore what we can expect from Auron and all the new tools that he has at his disposal. So as you can see here from the banner itself, it's going to feature Auron, his new kit with his LD, everything to do with that. It's also going to feature Seven and her EX and LD, and then it's going to be presumably the last chance that we get to get Lana and Rain BT, but obviously with the community stream happening really early this month, that is something, there is a non-0% chance that maybe something will come out that has Lana and Rain on it. We haven't seen what's going on with Vanille as of yet, for example, but who knows, best to keep our minds open with that. With regards to Seven, I mean, she wasn't that great when she came out, so realistically you're probably not going to be pulling for her now. She still has some off-turn damage, some sort of, some damage capabilities, but by and large, if you're pulling here, you're pulling for Auron. I don't have Seven, and if I were to get Auron quickly, I certainly wouldn't continue pulling for the sake of Seven. So let's take a look at Auron. Now Auron doesn't actually get a rework here, and yet his job completely changes when it comes to his LD, because his LD has a lot going for it. So by and large, up until this point, without the LD all told at all, Banishing Blade and Purgatory are multi-hit or single HP dumping attacks for AoE damage with 50% splash damage on Banishing Blade, and then AoE Bravery and AoE splash split damage when it comes to Purgatory. And Banishing Blade inflicts initial Bravery and max Bravery down, while also providing him with his Bushido buff, which is a generic offensive buff. And Purgatory was the thing that made him kind of stand out by inflicting melee resist down on the attack. And then he also can give himself speed up as well from using this attack as well, which is a thing. It's nice, it's nothing special, but melee resist down was always his thing. And then Dragon Fang is a multi-HP dumping attack already, which is quite pleasant. He also gets to delay all enemies by a turn, he gives himself physical attack up, and he also continues the melee resistance down for the enemy. So he hits relatively hard twice, and then he gets to continue this resistance down, or they'll be in peril on physical damage. So let's talk about Tornado, because nothing we've spoken about really makes him stand out. There's no rework or nothing. However, Tornado is very, very hard hitting in a lot of ways. So it is a 5-hit AoE Brave HP attack that hits twice, that ignores defense, and we always know that ignoring defense is a thing. That's a big deal. Definitely here for that. That also gives full break to all enemies for 3 turns, which is a brand new debuff. Melee resist down to all enemies for 4 turns. And then it gives him time to shape your stories, which is a new buff, and it also grants Sentinel to your party members for, well, 16 turns like after you put LD board. So 6 turns of full break, sorry, not 3. 12 turns of time to shape your stories, and 16 turns of Sentinel. So why would he be giving himself a buff and his party members a different one? Well, this is because he changes into a counter tank. So if you've used Gladio or Galoof, you'll know what kind of thing to expect here. But the first thing I want to look at is actually Full Break itself. Full Break is a vicious debuff, like it's really nasty. So it reduces the amount of bravery and HP damage that the enemy deals by 30%, but also gives another stack of melee resistance down by 30% and HP damage they take increased by 20%. This is a lot for a very, very compacted little debuff that you can get a lot out of from Auron, and you actually get this through his counterattack as well, so it's not going away anytime soon either. So time to shape your stories gives him brave damage resist up by 80%, HP regen by 10%, max brave overflow by 20%, gives him last stand, gives him HP and brave damage increase as long as he's attacking something with a debuff, which he pretty much always will be. And then after he does an HP attack, he gets brave refund, which will help with his EX as well, and then he gets counter attacks as well as long as he's taking a bravery or HP attack. And then Sentinel, obviously, turns him into the cover part of it, because while the party members have cover or have Sentinel on them, Auron will cover them, and then gives them defense up, damage resistance up, and gives them HP regen as well, because why not? We'll have some HP regen while we're here. So counter is a 4-hit bravery single target HP attack that ignores defense. So not only does his LD ignore defense, and he's inflicting all of this melee imperil, which obviously affects him and every other like melee party damage dealer that you've got in your party, but also ignores defense anyway with his counter attacks. It also heals him for half the damage that he dealt, so he's going to be keeping himself alive, which is very pleasant. Bear in mind he now has last stand as well, so it's going to be very difficult to kill him. And the counter also inflicts full break, which means that you're going to have full break the large majority of the time, if not the entire time you're using Auron. So he is a counter tank that hits really hard, that is providing party-wide benefits, not just through HP regen, damage reduction, things like that, but also by giving you this fantastic debuff ad nauseum while counter-attacking, and you're still going to get loads of stuff out of it, and he's keeping himself alive the entire time. Now, obviously he's not going to go in every party. If you're using a lot of turn hoggers, they may burn through the Sentinel buff really quickly, and if you're not planning on letting your enemy take a turn, then Auron obviously isn't going to be the character you're going to take to that. But in fights where you want the enemies to take turns, Boss Rush being a very good example, Dimensions End Transcendence 6 being a very good example, Auron is a character that is like the next step up in terms of counter-tanking. We've had our Gladios, we've had our Galoofs, and they are both still very good characters, but Auron definitely has a little extra spice in the mix by dealing just a boatload of damage and providing that filthy, filthy debuff. And as if that weren't enough to entice you into Auron, his cool abilities are actually pretty solid too. Like Purgatory is just the melee resist down, so you get that out of it, and you get full AoE HP damage on the enemy as well, so that's really nice that you get that out of it. So the weird thing with Auron is that some of his moves hit for split damage and then full damage, like his EX will, like the first AoE bravery HP is split damage and the second one is full damage. Purgatory is like a bravery, single target bravery, then an AoE bravery and an HP, like a full AoE HP attack. On his turns, he is still able to deal a solid amount of damage as long as there's multiple enemies on the board. But if not, even if you aren't taking Auron along to the party for whatever reason, you might want to consider taking him for his LD call ability, because you get the defense ignoring, multi-HP dumping attack that also inflicts both melee resist down and full break. And full break It's not the full break call ability, not quite as good as full break when it comes off of Auron himself, because the HP damaged up is not quite as big, but they're still able to deal less damage, and you're still getting the melee damage increase as well as the imperil for melee damage in general. So you're gonna find that if you're taking turn hoggers that like to deal melee damage, like Vayne or Garland for example, you probably want to take Auron's LD call along for that as well, because in combination with stuff like Kurasame, your damage is going to increase pretty heavily just on that on its own, just because of that dirty LD call extra, like debuff. Full break is fantastic, and it's something that you're going to benefit from a great deal going forward. In terms of armor, you get Tactics Keystone, which actually benefits him quite a lot because it's reducing their stats, like including their defense, which is more than the nicest thing that you're getting. So while his stuff ignores defense and the stuff that you care about from him, your party members can then benefit from it as well, and reducing their attack a little bit while he's not, because he's a counterattack that doesn't actually evade all that much. There's a lot that you can do with that. And then his HA plus increases his HP and his bravery caps by 20% each, which honestly I would consider for Auron if it's a character you plan on using a lot, because he has defense ignoring in a large amount of his kit. You probably will find that you're capping out with him a great deal, especially if you're using the likes of Kate Sith or anything that increases his damage exponentially. Barts, for example, you're going to hit those caps very quickly. So any damage that he can deal is going to make your turn count lower if you're using him for the off-turn damage that he's now designed for. So he's definitely somebody I would consider for blue armor as well. So now let's take a look at boss rush number 6. So the difference between this boss rush and any boss rushes we've had before is now Lufenia Plus is a thing, which we didn't really have before. Although it's dealt with slightly differently with boss rushes than it normally is. Now obviously there are Lufenia Plus alterations in general, but the biggest difference that you're going to find between the very hard and very hard plus versions of the boss rush is that instead of the 50 turns you get per party to bring along to this event, you now only get 30, whereas most other things kind of stay the same. So you're still going to be able to bring like parties that deal a large amount of damage or anything. You're just going to need to make sure that you're dealing a lot more of that damage in a much shorter space of time so that you're able to beat the clock. Now for this reason, obviously, off-turn damage is now more important than it ever was. So if you have the likes of Auron, Gladio, or characters like Ace, Beatrix, Cloud of Darkness, this is a great time to be using them, because there's lots of turns in between that you're taking by dealing damage with those characters that don't add to your clock. And obviously BT characters are going to be very important, because having a BT means that you have an extended period of time where you're able to make use of the BT phase, summons, etc. It's all largely the same thing as it was before, but obviously you have a shorter space of time. So let's go over each of the waves individually and see what we get out of that. So we get the large whales for the first wave, and the orb here asks that you deal weakness melee damage or you take reduced bravery damage. Now obviously this is the event that is designed for Auron. Now it's designed around Auron, but you don't have to take Auron, but you are pretty much definitely going to want to take some sort of a counter tank here, whether it be Gladio or Galoof or Auron. If you have neither of those, then that's going to be even more reason for you to want to pull for Auron. Because what these guys do, they don't actually have an awful lot of HP damaging attacks. They are there mostly to try to waste your time more than anything else. After they hit the 79% mark, so once the orb actually comes up, they also create an aura around them that means that every time you take a turn, so do they. So they're not going to do an awful lot with those turns in terms of HP damage, but what they are going to do is inflict frostbite on you, which means you can't gain bravery and your attack stat is decreased. So they don't do a lot of like damage to you, but they will do annoying things on you enough, and they have a large enough HP pool that they're going to try to waste your turn count. So things like Auron or Gladio obviously are going to work here, but any other kind of off-turn damage is going to work well here. Honestly, a character that, for obvious reasons, I don't see clears on with the JP side, but I think will work really well here is actually Core. particularly if you've got Bartz along with you. Bartz and Gladio actually work really well together anyway, because it means that Gladio can regain a lot of his bravery through Bartz's BT effect while he's doing all of the counter-attacking, and because the enemies take so many turns, you're going to get a lot of damage off through Gladio's counter abilities, or Auron's if you're pulling for Auron. But Core also benefits from Bartz as well, and because the enemies are taking so many turns, and there are all attacks, so for example Freeze Ray, which is the attack that inflicts Frostbite, it's only for one turn though, so even though you're losing those brave gains from Bartz a little bit, you will get them back pretty quickly. You'll be dealing a lot of damage, and because Core's the kind of character that can take advantage of ticking up those stacks to 10 so quickly, that he then gets free turns, so he's then able to act again if he wants to, so you can then free up even the likes of X-Death or anything like that, making sure that you're not getting pushed back too far. You've got a lot of options with that, with regards to just making sure you're dealing as much off-turn damage as physically possible. Wave 2, we're going to be seeing the return of the Count Steam enemies. Now, these guys were a menace back in the day when we did Deuce's Lost Chapter all the way back in Chaos Era. This time around, they're not nearly as bad. They don't skip turns, they don't do anything particularly big and scary. However, the orb here, it lasts from 80% up until around like the 30% mark, which is a bit of an odd way to go about it. But this one is going to be basically asking you for Garnet. So you want Thunder Weak bravery damage or Water Weak bravery damage, and like the intersecting wills from Garnet, it only increases for one turn for each of them. Now, these guys aren't naturally weak to thunder and water, so some sort of imperil is also going to be needed. And they also like to counter-attack melee attackers unless they're otherwise incapacitated through the likes of paralysis or confusion, something like that. Though I have seen, when I've watched clears, times where like Yang will do damage, or characters will do damage with melee and then not get countered. So I think that that's a bit more open to interpretation in terms of what the specifics are and what that causes the counter. But from reading the move list that they have, etc., they are designed to counter melee attackers. So maybe don't bring them along if you can help it. But as long as you've got Enchant Imperil, it doesn't have to come from Garnet. It can come from call abilities like Kryl or Ash or even Rydia, because as long as you're bringing those along and then hard-hitting magic damage, something like Cloud. If you have Cloud of Darkness, this is the perfect time to be using it, because those off-turn damages from Cloud of Darkness are going to make up the orb, and then you can kind of bring whatever you want past that point. They also aren't immune to Setzer's freeze, so you could bring Setzer along if you wanted to, and then Varn rounds out the team nicely so that you've got a BT phase alongside Cloud of Darkness and Setzer, and you pop in numbers everywhere, and these guys will not be nearly as scary as they were the first time. Obviously, if you have Garnet, you're probably going to want to bring Garnet along, but if you don't, there are options that you can take otherwise. And then the third and final wave is going to be from Nine's event. It's the bosses from that, so the ESP doll and the mini ESP dolls, who ask for you to deal 850,000 damage with one character, just like we did with Lan and Rain's event. And these guys have this orb, and it's actually the mini dolls that have it, not the main doll. So you have to take care of them rather than the main one. The main one has a recast attack that does double HP dumps and ignores brave reductions, but it doesn't reduce, it doesn't get around HP damage reduction. So if you want to bring Porum along, or even something like Warrior of Light's cool ability, you can take that to mitigate the damage from it and then just burst them down as hard as you physically can. If you have Lan and Rain, obviously the game kind of wants you to bring Lan and Rain here, but honestly, if you have BT attacks, you're probably going to bring that, and because it's a fresh it's a fresh event, if you've got a third party here, you could just go off with your burst phases, whether it be through Garland, Lan and Rain, Bart, Vayne, pretty much anyone will work, because the burst attack itself will trigger the orb almost certainly, because there's 3 enemies there, and as long as you're dealing 850k plus, you're going to be able to tick the orb back up. You'll have a fresh summon for this one wave. Each individual wave doesn't have as much HP as a typical Lufenia Plus. It's all about just dealing a lot of damage in a short space of time. It's all DPS check here. So as long as you're keeping up with that, then you'll find that the event is actually fine for you. Honestly, with a lot of JP players that I've spoken to, they've actually said that despite the restrictions on time in this boss rush, they've actually really enjoyed this one. So take your favourite units and run with it. And now, of course, we have Would You Pull, the section of the video where you, the viewer, get your chance to let your voice be heard before we make any final statements on whether we should ultimately be pulling on this banner and why. So thank you to all of my patrons once again for their comments and their votes. It's always very handy to have other opinions other than my own to showcase to the big greater community so that everyone can see what everyone's thinking. But with Auron, it's actually very, very interesting in that I actually thought that the gem count would be higher here, but 55% of people said that yes, they were going to pull all the way on gems here, and I am very firmly in this camp. And if I were to get Lana Rain BT here, this would be the point where I would consider going back and trying to get LD from their banner as well. I'm actually filming this before Garnet's release, so if I get it on that, do forgive me. Then 31% of people said that they were going to use 100 or more tickets, and then 7% said they were using less than 100 tickets, and 7% said no. Now I did actually put the feelers out and ask everyone if those are the people that said no to pulling or that weren't pulling to give any comments or anything as to why that might be the case, because I think that might be a fairly controversial opinion, and there's multiple votes for both of them, so I really wanted to hear from those people, but sadly nobody responded. So if you do vote on those sorts of comments where it's a bit more controversial, I would love to hear from you guys as to what your reasoning might be, and I'm sure everybody else would too, so a big thank you in advance for those of you that decide to do that. So going into the comments that we do have, Spickle here says 100 plus tickets for Auron. His LD buff is nigh on a rework. A very simple way of putting him is Gladio 2.0. If I didn't end up pitying Vayne LD, I'd be willing to gem him, but I don't have enough gems for a pity night right now and will only use gems if I'm willing to pity. Now, this is something I find very interesting because I always found it very interesting when people cried out for a rework in a character's kit, when realistically it's just a bit of text that's in a different place, because a character can effectively get reworked entirely just based on their LD. People cried out for it with a lot of the global exclusive stuff like VV back when he came out, Vincent, Balthea, everyone's like, where's the rework? Sometimes the rework is in the LD and people don't seem to see that sometimes. So I'm hoping that Auron is an exemplary character to show off for the fact that sometimes the rework is there, you just have to actually get the gear to use it. So, big thank you for that one. Atoy says, tickets for Auron, love the kit, and I'm always glad to have defensive plug and play characters that enable various comps. But, run of bad luck, banner luck has left me without gems to spare, so hopefully my favourite Ronin has a lucky ticket for me. I hope so too, because I think he's a great character, and it's never nice to be in a position where you're not sure whether you're going to be able to get a character that you really like or not. But I really, he is really great, and although it's very, very important for me to say as well that there is no one character in this game that you absolutely have to clear content. Auron is a fantastic character, he's very strong at what he does. But if you have Gladio and Galoof, for example, then you do have characters that can fulfill the role, even if they are a little more outdated than Auron is at this point in time. Kellen says, counter-tanks are some of the most hilarious fun for me in Opera Omnia, so Auron is definitely getting gems from me. If he wasn't crazy good, I'd still pull on him, as Auron has always eluded me when it came to building units, and he's my favourite character from 10. I can only hope he's nice to me, as this past month has been rather lackluster between trolling gold orbs and the non-gold blue orbs. And I'm also understanding that if the Getcha is going to getcha, it's going to feel cruddy regardless. Amen. Amen to this. So if I'm going to pity, it may as well be on a favourite. Also, it's on a banner that I don't have all the gear from, so if 7 wants to pass her LD my way, I won't say no. If I were to get 7 here, I probably wouldn't use her, if I'm being realistic. Like, she's pleasant, I guess, but at this point in time, I find it very unlikely that she's going to get used outside of people using it for the sake of saying, hey, I used 7 for this. But I do think it's really nice to hear that there are people out there that, other than myself, that kind of, you know, when it feels cruddy, when you get the gold orbs and they're not the thing you wanted, it happens to all of us. And I guess that's why sometimes I try and show my disappointment, and I'm very open about it, because I know that I'm not the only person on the planet that feels that way. And I think it's good to express those things, because then you kind of like venting it out and you're letting it go, and it doesn't affect you for the rest of the day. So thank you for that particular comment. And then finally, J-Dog says, I went back and forth between gems and tickets here, but ultimately decided gems. My tank units desperately need an upgrade, which is an absolutely perfect reason to go pulling here. And Auron fits that role perfectly with his counter tank. The fact that his counter ignores defense makes him super valuable in the Loof Plus era as bosses begin to get big defense boosts. Pair him with a support unit, a DPS unit, and you're good to go. It's quite also pleasant because Braska's just coming out in JP right now, and seeing that there is actually possibility for a Jekt Auron Braska team and it be cohesive is actually kind of cute, and I'm kind of living for it. But ultimately, Auron's a great character. You absolutely won't be disappointed if you go in for him, whether it's with gems or tickets, but don't ever think that you have to pull for him, because realistically you don't ever have to really pull on anyone unless you're lacking in that role as a whole. So now we come to the conclusion of the video. Of course, should you be pulling for Auron? Now, in my opinion, the answer is a big fat yes. I think he's very powerful. I think he does enough to update the counter-tank role to supersede the likes of Galoof and Gladio by way of giving that nasty, filthy, dirty, full break debuff, dealing defense-ignoring damage through both the LD itself and his counter-attacks. If you're likened to using a lot of zero boss turn strategies, he's still usable, just not in your main party because his LD call effect is really good for characters like Garland, Vayne, Jecht, and is usable for a very long period of time due to the way in which it counteracts brave damage reductions for melee attackers through the Imperil and the melee brave damage reduction sort of counterplays, things like that. There's a lot that Auron has to offer, and it helps that he's a really popular character as well. So he provides HP regen, defense increases, brave damage reduction, all the things that tanks do, but also provides brand new ways of doing it as well. He's basically Gladio 2.0. It's the nicest way to think of him. And even, like I said, even when you're not taking him in your party, he does provide an LD call that's good enough to be up there with the likes of your Kurasames, etc., because it does very well at compounding alongside those sorts of calls. He doesn't benefit everybody. Like, he is very focused on melee damage, so he imperils melee, he increases brave damage from melee attackers. He doesn't mean that this doesn't mean he can't be used with other magic damage dealers, because if he's in your main party, the worst thing he's going to do is augment his own damage, but he definitely has characters he'd rather be in a party with than magic damage dealers, for example. And because the counter tank buff is attached to his LD, yes, Sentinel lasts for 16 turns. You're probably not going to run out of it quickly. Using him with turn hoggers or against enemies that like to dispel silver buffs means that you will have to use the LD again in order to get those buffs back, and that may not be ideal because you only get so many uses of the LD, and without the LD, Auron's not great. You kind of need that LD buff to be present in order for him to really shine, but when he does very well at it. If you're with turn hoggers though, chances are you're probably going for a zero boss turn strategy rather than one that requires a counterattack, so really, why are you bringing a counterattack into that kind of team anyway? 7, she's on the banner. That's pretty much all I have to say about her. She's definitely not a character that anyone's going to be chasing after at this point. People will use her because they'll say that they've used her, but realistically there are a lot of better options in terms of your damage dealer, debuffer, off-turn damage dealer than there is in 7. Like, she's there. That's the only real thing I can really say about her. But Auron is good enough that you could pull on this banner, and if you got 7, cool. So that's going to be all for today's video. Thank you all very much for watching once again. Do let me know in the comments below whether you would or wouldn't pull on Auron and give your reasons as to why, especially if you wouldn't. I would love to hear from people who aren't fancying Auron, or would like if they perhaps are using alternatives to Auron for Boss Rush 6. Let me know what teams you're planning on using for that. And then that's going to be it from me. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click that bell for notification of future videos I might be making. And with that, I shall love you and leave you. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon. Take care.